Welcome to the MindSpa Podcast Neurofeedback series. For this episode, we are going to be talking about LORETA, a different form of neurofeedback than what we've discussed before. And we've got Yvonne, our director of neurofeedback, talking today about LORETA. So maybe we'll start with, what does LORETA stand for?
Yeah, great question. It's a mouthful. It means low resolution electromagnetic tomography. So basically with LORETA, based on, so it's a little complex. So it works off what's called an inverse problem. So based on the surface level measurements or recording of that electrical activity, it makes predictions of the activity in deeper areas of the brain, like the amygdala or, the hippocampus.
Deeper structures of the brain.
Exactly.
Because primarily, and actually anybody will put images up, or anybody who's watching the video can see here, we have EEG brain map here, and this is picking up the electrical activity on the surface level of the brain, not the deeper structures. Yeah,
exactly. So with LORETA, it's predicting that interactivity and where there is too much or too little of it. So it's different than with the specific brain waves. Too much alpha, like is alpha turned up? Is it turned down? With LORETA, it's looking at all of the different brain waves within that region, within the deeper network.
When you say region, do those equate to the spots on the cap?
So it's deeper, going within to those deeper structures. It might be getting toward the amygdala through like the temporal through the temporal lobe. It's working through Brodmann areas. So Brodmann areas, it's like a map of the brain. We can put up an image of it, but it looks like a puzzle. So there's 52 Brodmann areas. Depending on where the Brodmann area is located on the map of the brain, it has its specific function. So for example, we have Brodmann area 10, which is in the prefrontal cortex, and its primary function is with executive function, emotional regulation, and so forth. So there's these different areas that, based on location, have a specific function and are associated with specific symptoms or networks. So for example, we have the anxiety network. So the anxiety network is going to be made up of Brodmann areas or deeper regions that are connected to the experience of anxiety. Each network can be a little bit different. There's overlap between networks. Classic examples like the anxiety network. We have executive function network. We have the default mode network. So default mode network is kind of how we are at a resting state. Our internal clock. Default mode network has one of the networks that has the most Brodmann areas or other regions in it. And there is a lot of overlap. So some of the areas that are in that network are also in the anxiety network. So often that is a case where I'll train the default mode network because we're targeting more of the areas of concern. So there's different networks. So we choose which networks we're going to look at and see what level of over or under activation there is within these different areas based on the intake information and their presenting concerns.
So it's not based on the map.
It is to a degree. Yeah. So we're looking at the maps. I would generally recommend LORETA as an option when there is a lot of interhemispheric and a lot of connectivity dysregulation. So looking at the asymmetry and the coherence.
Okay. So sometimes a brain map, we actually have a before and after here right now, but if we're looking at the before, sometimes the before, this is actually quite clear. It looks more like the after, but you see a lot of dysregulation happening here. So that's when you would actually more likely recommend LORETA, is when on the surface, everything is actually looking pretty good.
Yeah.
But then we see a lot of dysregulation, and this ties into their symptoms as well.
Exactly. So we're looking at the connectivity between the different areas. And then also we have another part of the analysis that we do that's called the symptom checklist.
Okay.
And we can look at the networks and it'll show us exactly which Brodmann areas and deeper regions are showing to be, +1, +2, +3 standard deviations, or -1, -2, -3. Essentially what that means is like, that would be +1, +2, +3 would be the green, yellow, orange, red, and the -1, -2, -3 would be the shades of blue. So it's that dial up, dial down, but more in the way of over and under activation in those different areas and deeper regions. This checklist allows us to see how many of the total number of areas are showing any sort of dysregulation, whether it's too much or too little activity. I look from the orange and red colors and the darker shades of blue, because when we see the more green or lighter blue, it's not as statistically significant because it's more of like
it's
a
mildly away from the.
So it's not as high or problematic, you could say. So I'm looking to see, okay, how many of the total number of areas is being checked off as too much or too little. And then if more than half of the network is dysregulated or problematic, then that's where I'd say, okay, LORETA is a good fit for you. So I'll look at the connectivity on these maps here to see what is the interhemispheric, what's happening between. And then I'll also look at the symptom checklist. And that's where I'll decide, okay, is LORETA a good fit for this individual? If I see they are a good fit for LORETA, but we also see the surface level patterns, I often will go towards single channel first, and then we could do LORETA at a different date.
Okay. So single channel is training the brainwave activity that's happening at the surface level of the brain. So if you're seeing dysregulation at the surface level and the deeper areas, you'll do treatment on the surface level first. And then depending on how they respond, how they're feeling, if there's still anything that's off, then we might recommend LORETA to target the deeper structures of the brain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Brodmann areas are pretty surface level, but with this, it's more we're targeting in on one specific brainwave. We see patterns of overactivity. We see the volume turned up with alpha. So we might want to put just one electrode at the top, and we're targeting alpha. This is more targeted to specific brainwaves, where with LORETA, it could be when we're looking at a specific region or a specific Brodmann area, it could be that multiple frequencies within that area are dysregulated. So it's training the region as a whole.
One single.
Yeah, this is getting specific at a single frequency. So this one gets a little bit more at the region as a whole, and then also like the connections between the different areas. So with LORETA, there's a lot of options in terms of training. You can train the asymmetry, you can train the coherence, you can train some of the more intricate details of interconnectivity.
Okay. All right. So it sounds a bit more complex. LORETA sounds complex.
And I find that's where the simplicity of training just with one or two frequencies can often be the better option.
Okay.
Especially as a first experience of neurofeedback. But if we're not seeing a lot of the colors on these maps, then I would
especially
say
in the darker reds and orange or the darker blue.
But we are seeing some of the patterns, or we're seeing that a lot of a network, like the anxiety network, has 20 Brodmann areas in it, and that's 20 considering left and right hemisphere. So it's individually there's 10, but it's everything's like Brodmann area 10 left, 10 right, because it's whatever's on the left also on the right. So with that, there's 20 Brodmann areas. If 18 of the 20 are marked off, but we're not really seeing anything in these surface maps here, I'm saying, okay, well, like LORETA is probably the way we want to go. Okay. That also depending on like what their presentation is, or like what information is gathered during the intake, and also their capacity for like wearing the cap every session. And there's so many other factors that go into it, but that would be one way of like LORETA would be the option I would lean towards rather than single channel.
This is a good opportunity to look at the cap, because this is the cap that we both use to do the QEEG brain map. It's also the cap that we use to do LORETA. If you haven't watched the previous video, you put in gel in each one of those spots there. With LORETA, when you do the treatment, you want to make sure you're not doing anything afterwards, because your hair will have a bunch of stuff in it.
Often people do it at the end of the day. It can be, depending though, like if you've had a full work day and then you come and do LORETA, it can be tiring. So we do try to, like, if there can be some flexibility, if you're noticing you're doing it at the end of your work day and you're too tired to be able to engage and you're kind of like drowsing or falling asleep, we might say, is there any way for us to do it on a different time? So LORETA is only once a week for this type of neurofeedback,
whereas the other type is twice a week.
So there's more flexibility with time and commitment in that way. So I find people do like that factor of it, but it is one where if you're too tired to engage, we might say, okay, maybe earlier in the day is a better time. Ultimately, we work with what we can do, but if you're falling asleep and you're not able to engage, that goes with the single and double channel training as well. If you're falling asleep, we might say, is there any way we can adjust the timing of the session?
And so with this one here, describe to me so the setup is going to be more time consuming for LORETA than single or double channel training, because we have to get all the connectivity. And
so one thing that's really important, there are things that you can do to help the setup or facilitate it and make it go easier. Not having product in your hair.
No hair gel, no hairspray.
If you come in, your hair is full of gels, oils, hairspray, whatever the case is, that can make it more challenging for us to get a connection. It doesn't mean we're not going to get a connection, but it can interfere with it and make it harder for us to get a good connection. So that's one thing that you can do at home, is making sure that you don't have any residual products or oils or dirt and stuff in your hair. And then how we go about it is we use a cotton swab and we have rubbing alcohol and we clean the areas that are going to line up with the electrodes. The main focus is forehead because that's open skin. So we get a lot of buildup on our foreheads of oils and dirt. Yeah. And, you know, if you're wearing makeup, we're going to want to wipe it off. So we're wiping that off. And how we'll do it is we'll kind of like go in lines, like the electrodes. I don't know if we can see it here, but they go in lines down the side. So I will often part the hair in a way that I'll scrub down the line with the rubbing alcohol because we want to get as close to the scalp as we can. I'm scrubbing, making sure that we're getting all the areas the best that we can. Once I've done that and I feel good about my cleaning capabilities, I'll put the cap on. I usually have the client put the chin strap on for themselves. Then I'll start inserting gel into each of these little holes. So each of these holes is an electrode. So we take just like a liquid gel. That is what allows us to make the connection with the brainwave activity. It's like a conductor, and we insert it into each of the spots. While we're doing that, the technician running the session, they have their computer open with what's called like a signal check. So as we're putting the gel in, it's lighting up green when the connection is being made. And then there's the raw EEG, like the squiggly lines on the side. So we can also see, yes, it's green, it's showing connection, but does the EEG actually look clean, look good? We're not seeing a lot of air bubbles or muscle tension or...
And that's something you guys are all trained to be able to identify when you're looking at the EEG. Some people will just see a random squiggly line. You guys see information.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So we're kind of looking out for those things and trying to see, okay, is the electrode, maybe it's connected, but it's not a stable connection. So if we need to add more gel, we'll do that. Sometimes we use a syringe and kind of move the gel around a little bit on the inside just to make sure it's spread on the... and making sure that we have that connection. From there, once we are confident in our connection, and I mean, things happen, tech always likes to challenge us. Once we're confident in our connection, we open up the other portion of the software where we can then get into the session itself, where the client is watching their screen. And then similar to traditional, like the single double channel, they're getting some form of visual feedback. So they're watching something, and when their brain is effective in working within the parameters that we or the technicians have set on their computer that they are monitoring, they'll be rewarded with the visual feedback. So it's kind of like they're setting a threshold or like a difficulty level. When their brain is effective in working within those parameters, they're rewarded. If their brain is drifting or starting to do work outside of what we're trying to teach it, their vision will repeat it. They'll get the bubbles, or it'll zoom out and they can't see it, or the movie will pause.
When it comes to results of LORETA, how are they the same, and how is it different from doing traditional single or double channel neurofeedback?
A lot of the results are similar in terms of what the individual notices and how they're noticing. The LORETA and single double channel are very similar in the nature of a gradual approach. It's taking many sessions over time to notice change. I would say in terms of it depends on what the focus is, what the goal is, but ultimately the goal is going to be similar: reduce symptoms of anxiety, improve or increase clarity, or improve emotional regulation. That sort of is similar as a whole. And that's also where I might recommend LORETA or single double channel over the other. What is the goal? Like emotional regulation as a whole, that actually could be a good fit for LORETA and training the default mode network. Or if we want to get specific with, what's a good example? Insomnia, I might lean more towards like a single channel. It kind of depends on like what's outlined.
Okay.
And then also with that, but I would say in terms of what you would notice is going to be the same between the two
Okay.
Like
In the amount of time, for some reason, I thought that Loretta sometimes took a bit longer to notice the benefits than single or
it
double.
can.
Okay.
I think it's very individual. I think it's just dependent on the
Okay, so it's not
person.
universal to the
Yeah,
types.
I wouldn't say it's universal. I think I've had some experiences where people have noticed earlier with Loretta than with the single or double channel.
I guess that
And then
makes sense if it's
sometimes-
targeting like actually a whole system versus just like a singular.
Yeah. And that's one thing I find that could be challenging with Loretta is because we're targeting more as a whole, it can actually be more tiring, like
Okay.
energy-wise for them. They might notice more fatigue after sessions, or it might feel harder in session 2, like, oh my gosh, there's so many bubbles. And that's where we, as technicians or professionals, need to adjust and make it easier or work with the client on what is going to work best for them. Like, as a whole, generally we do 5-minute rounds.
Okay.
So it'll be like 5-minute round where they're watching, and then they get like a 10 to 30 second break, and then another 5-minute round. In total, once they work up, in the beginning, we start with about 30 minutes of training. We work up to 40. Let's say 5 minutes is like that last minute. We're noticing consistently of each round, they're dozing. They're so tired, they can't. So maybe it's like, okay, we'll do 4-minute rounds. We can do
Okay.
that.
So you can adjust it very specific to the person.
Yeah.
And
And
that's-
make it best for their learning, because everyone learns different. Everyone's capacity or ability to focus for certain periods. And maybe we start with the 4 and go to 5.
Because I think that's something that's really important for people to understand of the strength of what neurofeedback is it is incredibly tailored to the individual. It is tailored to their brain map. It is tailored to their specific symptoms and the symptoms that they want to work on. And then even when they're doing the sessions, there is what TV show do you want to watch? And then we're going to tailor it to if we do notice, because there's like a window of best level of difficulty. So you learn at your best, and everybody's is slightly different. And we're able to actually look at your experience, see the feedback on the screen, and be able to make adjustments to the person.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Of like, we'll kind of start with the standard, see how they respond. And then if we need to make an adjustment, we can make that adjustment and kind of work with them to facilitate where they're at.
Yeah.
Like, we're trying to kind of meet the client where they're at for that. I think there's other things outside of the neuro room that can make or break the impact of the training. With the technicians in sessions, they'll emphasize importance of like getting a good sleep the day of training. So if you're doing a neuro session today, it is ideal for you to try your best to get a good sleep, get enough hours, be in bed, maybe not at 1 a.m., maybe a little bit earlier, depending on your schedule and what fits your life. But you want to try to get a good sleep. Also with caffeine, as soon as you walk out of the room, it's not ideal to go grab a coffee. Although
Right.
I've done it. Sometimes you need to, but it's not, you kind of want to put yourself in the best position you can to facilitate how the training is going to work. Caffeine immediately before or after isn't ideal. Same with sugar. That's not going to be the best. Same with hunger cues. You don't want to go into a session feeling really hungry. Like, if your stomach's growling when you're sitting there, it's not going to be as ideal. You want to be like comfortably full.
All right.
Yeah.
And if I understand correctly too, there's some recommendations for right after a session. The young folk or folks with ADHD maybe not get right onto screens or video games in
I
particular
think that's
for the
for
young.
everybody. Try your best to stay off the screen immediately after.
Yeah.
The main one with the stuff we know about brainwaves is if you can get a good night's sleep, even rest.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're here for insomnia and you're like, I'm not going to sleep.
Yeah.
At least if you can get a good amount of rest so that your brain can get into a more calm state so that the learning can consolidate and kind of sink in.
Right.
That's the best.
Yeah. One of the other things I think is important for everybody to understand, especially when emotional regulation is and anxiety, let's say are the two of the things that we're looking at. Sometimes people have to recognize that if their environment is a very high stress environment, so either home or work in which they spend 8 hours a day at work or whatever the other 8 hours a day at home, if they are very, very high stress, that is going to work against the learning. We would expect to still see overall improvements, but they are going to be limited if you keep throwing yourself in high stress environments immediately after training, right?
And that too of like substance use, of like using like alcohol alcohol or like recreational, like cannabis or something like that too, that's going to impact the training.
Okay.
So ideally it's like, okay, on days of training, you're not engaging in those activities.
And all that's explained to everybody in advance.
Yeah. Yeah.
To help them benefit as much as they can from that.
So the technicians will kind of, as they're walking you through the process, they're like, okay, these are some of the things like with the Q as well. Everybody gets like a prep sheet before that kind of outlines like, okay, no product in your hair.
Right.
You know, how can you go into it with the best intentions, I suppose. And then same for like when they're doing training, the first session is usually like them getting the ropes of, okay, this is kind of what to expect and what maybe like not to do. Obviously, if you're going to do it, you can do it.
We're not going to put you. We're not going to like,
we'll kind of give the recommendation to help facilitate the best possible results. This is kind of the ideal.
Okay.
And then no technology before bed.
Which is just a general good rule of thumb. Many of the recommendations are all things that you would just generally say are a good idea, but recognizing that they specifically are going to make the results not as strong and potentially have to have you do more sessions to get the desired outcome. Yeah. Yeah. And so why is LORETA once a week instead of twice a week?
You're training a lot more areas at once. It's a lot more tiring. And I think if you were to do it, I mean, you can, but I think you would be very tired.
Okay.
And I've done
and
it
the brain
with
doesn't learn well when it's...
I've done it with some people who had done more like mass and they're like, they only had a certain amount of time and they're like, I'm going on a trip. And I'm like, okay, not ideal, but we could do 2 or maybe even 3 in a week. But I remember we did the 3 and they were completely wiped.
Mental fatigue.
Yeah, complete mental fatigue. They're like, it's just too much. And I'm like, for sure, okay, we tried it. 2 seems more manageable. We'll do that instead. Even that, it's very tiring. And I think it comes down to the intensity maybe of like how much we're training in the brain. We're single channel. We're a lot more targeted. Even with single channel and double channel, I have the option, like we can train more than one area at the time. And sometimes I do, depending on logistics or things that go into it. We can train more than one area, but generally the brain does better with simplicity. With single channel, we can train one spot and keep it there. The brain is probably going to do a little bit better. It can grasp it a little bit easier, where it's a lot more heavy on the brain to be doing that.
That is very cool. LORETA is interesting. You present all the options. You go through their QEEG brain map, their intake, their goals. We present them with different options. If LORETA seems like a good idea, you let them know. But if clients say, you know what, I don't want to do that one, I want to do single or double, and we see a good case for doing that, the client gets to decide as well, right?
Often if I do find that like we could go either way, we could do the LORETA, we could do single channel, I'll kind of give them, I'll be like, okay, so here are like more of the convenience items of it. I'm like, LORETA, you have the cap. You're going to have your hair full of gel every set you come in. Pro, it's once a week. That's ideal for a lot of people in terms of commitment. Single channel, on the other hand, pro, you don't have gel. Like you have a bit of paste that we clean out. So you're walking out of here clean as a whistle.
Good to go.
You're good to go. But generally, I'm going to recommend twice a week. So that's where I'm like.
And LORETA's also, is it also 20 to 40 sessions?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's also spread out over a longer period of time then?
Yes, this would be longer, yeah.
Okay.
It's only once a week.
But again, because we're trying to make more complex changes, that makes sense that it might take a bit longer. Yeah. But also you're just doing it once a week. So in a lot of ways, it's still the same number of sessions. Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like that might be all we have.
Yeah. I can't think of anything else.
Okay, so thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please reach out to us because we will happily answer any questions